You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima.
Good morning, Allison.
Hi, Justin. How are you?
It's spring, which
True.
maybe you're aware of.
It has finally come to me as well.
But
yes,
I've just been really enjoying it. The weather has been beautiful, and spring, as someone who enjoys birds, spring is this magical time when all of these birds are coming up from the south. They're migrating, and so they're showing up and they're singing in the morning, and it's just this like really just magical, like beautiful time. And I don't know, it's one of those things that makes me appreciate like the cycles of the seasons and kind of how like, you know, things are always changing. Nothing's ever static. And it's just this like, I don't know, time of like life really blossoming. Yeah. So I've been trying to get out as much as I can and enjoy that and soaking that up in the moments that I can find time for it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. It is kind of, I was saying this morning that I felt like outside my window, it looks like Snow White or something. Cause it's like, there's like a little den of baby chipmunks right in front of my window. And then there were squirrels and then the bunnies were hopping and then there was a woodpecker. And I was just like, whoa.
Yeah.
So it is a pretty magical time. And I think that those are little micro moments.
Yeah.
For sure. You know, like, and we can't all like you often are able to like get in your car and go off and see birds, but like even me sitting on my couch looking out, I'm like, look at the bird, look at the chipmunk, you know what I mean? And it might sound silly, but I think those are the things that like those are little, what do they call them? Glimmers.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Like little glimmers of like, look, it's a den of baby chipmunks in my yard, you know? So yeah, good. Well, I'm glad you're having those magical moments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How's life been over there?
You know, not awesome. Unfortunately, Sean had another biopsy on his gums that came back cancer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So just to kind of paint a little picture, like two little pictures. One is that like I sent him off to that appointment. It was just a regular kind of screening appointment because I had this big meeting. I said, "You okay going by yourself?" He said, "Yep." I said, "Do you have any concerns, you know, that you're going to want her to look at?" He said, "Nope." So he comes home. I'm in the middle of this meeting and I look up and his face is full of gauze. His cheek is full of gauze. And I was like, darn it. So, you know, I had to work through a little bit of the like, I wasn't there and, you know, all that stuff. So then we're in the waiting stage of like, you know, and then another little snapshot of our life. So the other day it was like 3:51 p.m. and at 4 p.m. we were going to meet with my daughter's like financial aid counselor from college to talk over the financial aid package. And so I was like, all right, everybody, time for the Zoom. Come on. You know, and so I am sitting there at the computer and then the phone rings and it's his oral surgeon, the one who had taken the biopsy. And then she's like, is this a good time to give you the results? Well, you're not ever going to say no to that.
Yeah, right.
So I put her on speakerphone. Sean walks in. She starts explaining that it's cancer. And then Badeline walks in because I had just called everyone in.
You're right.
Right. And then she's got all this like gauze in her hands because the dog's paw is continuing to be an issue. And so she's standing there and then the doctor's like, and we might have to take one of your teeth because we don't want the cancer to go into your tooth and da-da-da. And then we're just like, what? So then finally at like 3:59, I was like, I'm sorry, we gotta go. So then we hang up, boop, and then boop, turn on the Zoom call of like, here's how much financial aid we're going to give you, and here's how much you're going to pay, and and then we went right from that. Like we hung up with her to like signing our daughter up for like her college classes and her dorm and her meal plan. And finally, like 2 hours later, we finished all that, and I was like, remember that call we got at 3:51? What? So it's just like a whiplash.
Yeah, for
you know,
sure.
like. And it's hard because he's had so many giant cancers. Giant as in like very serious and needing body parts and organs removed. Then there's part of me that's like, okay, this is, I would guess, we don't know for sure yet. They're still working on a plan, but like, I would guess it's going to be a same day surgery. I would guess it's, you know what I mean? Like I would be shocked if they talked about any kind of radiation or, you know what I mean? Like that is not what's going to happen here. But at the same, so it's like way less than like the big things that have happened, but it's still a big deal.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
And so anyways, there's sort of that of like, and then my brain is sort of fighting with itself about like, well, it's not that big of a deal, but it is a big deal.
It is a big deal.
You know,
yeah.
And then also letting myself feel the fact that like, it's a huge deal to like sign your kid up for college class.
Right.
And,
yeah.
like,
That's another huge thing you're doing.
Like,
yeah.
whoa. So yeah. And then he just had another dilation of his esophagus this week. And so I had a week of feeling really exhausted. And I just had to keep reminding myself, like, it makes perfect sense that you feel tired.
Right.
It makes perfect sense that it's okay that you feel tired. Because I get sort of like, why am I so tired? What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
You know, of course you're tired.
Yeah.
You know, so, but yesterday was like, there was this magical day of like 0 things on the calendar. The weather was perfection. In Minnesota, they always say like, you should wait until Mother's Day to plant things in the ground. And today is Mother's Day. And so yesterday I was like, it's close enough. And so I was just like out there, like gardening and dirty and happy. And it was great. So I'm feeling more myself today.
Good. I'm glad.
But yeah, just, you know, the never ending. So speaking of Mother's Day this week, you know, my mom lives in town, which is amazing. And so for her Mother's Day gift, we were going to go out. We were going to get coffee and treats and go get pedicures together.
Oh, nice.
On Thursday morning because Sean's surgery was Thursday afternoon. And I was like, this would be a lovely thing to sort of boost my spirits and morale before this afternoon surgery. And so we had this thing planned. It was going to be lovely. And then that morning I looked at Winston, the dog's paw, which I can't remember if I told you this online, or on the podcast, but a couple weeks ago his paw split open. Yes, I did talk about it.
Yeah.
They had taken the staples out. They were like, everything's fine. But then we looked at it that morning and we're like, yeah, no, this looks terrible. This looks really bad. So then I take a picture and I call the vet and then they're like, you need to come in now. And I'm like, cool. So here I am trying to like schedule something nice.
Yeah.
Both for me, but also for my mom. And like, nope, not going to happen. So I had to call her and say like, I'm sorry, Mom, it's not going to happen. You know, you can still go if you want and, you know, but I can't go. And I was like, I'm so sorry. And she was like, you know, anything that you and I do together, I always just put in pencil on the calendar because I just know that's how you, and she said it in a very kind way. Like, you know, it's fine. But also it's like, I don't want to be a person who people can only pencil in, but I know I am. So in the end, I will say that, Sean, when he figured out what was going on, was like, I'll take the dog. And I hadn't wanted to ask him that because, you know, he's about to have surgery, but he was like, I'll take the dog. So he took the dog. I still got to go out with my mom.
Oh, nice.
Which was great.
Yeah.
But all that leads me to say is that today for us to talk about managing disappointment.
Yeah.
Because as caregivers, I mean, as humans, right? Life can be disappointing. But as caregivers, I think that can happen even more than the average bear. And so there's little things like that day of like, as I'm doing this thing, my calendar keeps being like 30 minutes till your pedicure, 20 minutes till your pedicure. And I'm like, shut up, you know? And so just that, I think of like, how do we, from tiny things to huge things to like, how do we manage the sort of ongoing pieces of disappointment that we experience as caregivers? So as I say that, what does that bring up for you?
Yeah, I was thinking about this and disappointment and kind of like, well, what is that and kind of how that, I don't know, plays out. And I think like you mentioned the range of little things, and your thing wasn't a little thing. I mean, that's maybe a medium thing. I don't know, somewhere in there. But into like these big things. And I think for like the really big things, like disappointment often doesn't really feel like a big enough word for that kind of stuff. Like where you are, I don't know, going through a treatment regimen and it doesn't work. Yeah. Disappointment, saying you're disappointed feels kind of trite. So kind of, I was thinking, you know, yes, there's that stuff, but that feels like a little bit of another category.
Yeah, I hear
like the big stuff maybe.
Yep.
But there is so many, I guess, opportunities for disappointment. in life as a caregiver.
Positive spin.
Yeah, I meant it a little bit sarcastically, I think. So, because we can't predict the health of our people.
Yep.
And it can be hard to make plans and follow through on those plans.
Yep.
And, we can have expectations for how a day is going to go, and it just doesn't go that way. And that just is part of our lives.
Yeah.
And that's tough.
Yeah.
And, in thinking through like this whole disappointment thing, like it really comes down to like we expected one thing and like that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, when we're talking about, okay, managing disappointment, I think the corollary, I guess, to that is like managing expectations.
Mm.
And I think with that, like we don't want to go through always expecting the best possible outcome, because I think we know from our lives that that's not what is going to happen every time. Like,
okay, but time out. Can we just pause? Because that's sad, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's sad that most people can just be like, oh, well, I'm going to plan this fun thing with my mom. I'm going to plan a trip. I'm going to plan this. I'm going to just assume that I know what today's going to look like. And, for the most part, that's what's going to happen. And we can sort of say, for the most part, that's not going to happen.
Right. Or there's always a little asterisk by what the expectation. Yeah.
Or a giant asterisk.
Yeah.
And so I think just like the overall, like the color painted over our whole lives or whatever, I don't know. It's just, I just want to like acknowledge that it feels, I don't know what the word is, disappointing. Yeah. Just that's our go-to is like, well, it's probably not going to happen,
Right.
And that is sort of the overall theme, unfortunately. Yeah. So, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. So, there's that kind of extreme where you're like expecting everything to work out right. And like that just doesn't happen. And that's I know I've talked about this before, like hope, when you're always hoping for the best and you're always just like, it doesn't come through. Like, you're just picking yourself off the floor each time. And like, you just can't, that's unsustainable, that roller coaster of that. Yeah. But then the other thing with you can have just expect nothing, zero expectations, or expect the worst, or just not getting your hopes up at all in a way to, I think, protect yourself from feeling disappointment.
Yeah.
And I think that, while that may not be long-term the best like coping strategy, like that is a way that your self is trying to protect you from that disappointment.
It's true.
But, at the same time, if you're never expecting, then like you're not expecting people to help.
Right.
And if you're not expecting people to help, then why am I going to ask them?
Right.
And so I think you can kind of go down a path there that is not a great trajectory either.
Right.
And so I think there's something somewhere in the middle between those two. And it, it's hard to kind of figure out where that is maybe day to day. And maybe it varies as far as like, where do I put my expectations? What do I, or hold them lightly to try to, and I don't think we're never going to avoid disappointment. Like that's just going to be part of it. And so how we respond when we feel that way, how do we not let it completely upend our lives every single time we feel it? Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's just a lot to kind of think about around all of this.
There is. I just, as you were talking, I wrote down the word people, because coming into this, I think I was thinking about disappointment around stuff, events, life. And I think a whole branch we could take this down at some point today is people, right? When we feel disappointed in the people around us, right? Not showing up or doing things like that. So I want to wrote a little note about that to remember to go back to. I appreciate what you said about like holding it lightly, because there's this phrase that I've heard that's like, hope for the best, expect the worst, take what comes. And I could be misquoting that, but it's something to that effect, right? And it's funny. So I have a brother, and he's sort of like a pragmatic kind of guy.
Okay.
And so he always says that like before vacations and stuff like that, he doesn't get his hopes up.
Okay.
Because he would rather like be surprised if it goes well and is fun, than be disappointed if it doesn't.
Okay.
And I know that my earlier in life bubbly optimistic self was like, that's a sad way to live. What are you doing? And now I'm a little bit like, well, I get that.
Yeah.
Right. And that's more like his personality. Like for him, it's not sort of like for me, I feel like data has shown that you should sort of expect that things are not going to go through, For him, I think it was just more like, that's just kind of the way he rolls.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot around trips and whatnot. I've maybe mentioned this before, but someone gave me a bag once that has this Anne of Green Gables quote that says something like, looking forward to it is half the beauty, or I don't know, something like that. And I'm like, no, Anne, no, it's not. because I find myself like, I don't even like try not to look forward to the things like trips because I'm just like, I mean, who knows? If they happen and they're great, then I will just sit in the moment and be like, wow, look at this.
Yeah.
But I tend to not be like, okay, can't wait. It's going to happen, because I'm like,
there might be a global pandemic that cancels
there
your
might
trip.
Be yes. Right?
Yeah.
And so, I think that's a good thing to note, that like for everybody, this kind of thing can happen, like global pandemic, kid can get sick. But for us, it's just like there's a whole extra pile of reasons.
Yeah, right.
Why it might happen. And so I think when you said that, like around like, can we hope? A hope that it's going to go well? Yeah. But can we expect? I mean, is like expecting that it's not going to go well? Is that us being Debbie Downer? Is that us being protective? Is that us being realistic? Yes, all of the above. Is it like a sad way to live, or is it like a better way to live than continuing having these? Because I feel like if we go like up, hope, oh, I can't wait, it's going to be so great, and then crashing down because it didn't happen, as opposed to just like, I mean, if it happens, that'll be great.
Right. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where you're trying to hold like two, not contradictory, but two kind of different things at the same time. Like, I think it would be, to me, it would feel odd to be going in, let's say it's some sort of treatment, right? With no hope that it's going to work.
Sure.
Right. And I mean, maybe you're there because just so many times things have been tried and nothing has worked.
Sure.
But you're still doing something. So there is still some amount of like hope there, or you wouldn't still be pursuing these things.
Right.
Although I guess it could be, your person wants to keep doing this.
Yeah.
And I guess that's a whole nother piece, I guess, is when expectations between the person you're caring for and your expectations don't line up. And like, that's could complicate things as well. But, I think we want to have some hope, because that's why we're doing this. We want our person to be in a better place. Like we truly, I think, want that, or we do. And so we're always going to have that. But I think too, we need to also, I don't know if it's like preparing ourselves for if that doesn't go that way ahead of time.
Sure.
And if that's a way to help kind of stave off the dramatic, like hope crash, like you were referring to, and kind of not in a way that is trying to be like pessimistic or anything like that, but just to, okay, I do want this to work, but what is it going to look like if it doesn't?
Yep.
What do we have a next step?
Yep.
And to kind of think through that and have one of those in each hand, kind of, and just like, okay, this is the range of things that we could have going into this and that coming out of it. And yeah.
I do a session on anticipatory grief.
Yeah.
And one of the photos that I have in there is of people playing tug of war. And on one end of the rope is hope. And on the other end of the rope is acceptance.
Right.
Because it's like you're grieving and you're like, well, maybe it'll be fine and they'll live forever and it'll be so great. But then also you're like, that's probably not what's going to happen. Right. And then you can feel pulled. So when you say holding it in both hands, it's like, yes. And if you almost imagine this tug of war of like you're being pulled back and forth, of some days where like, yes, I think this is going to happen. Ooh, it's definitely not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. And I think there's the whole range. I went into this conversation today thinking about disappointment around things like events being canceled, trips being canceled, days not going the way I expected. Not so much. I hadn't really thought about treatment, you know, or that kind of thing. But I think you're right that that's part of it too. Did you ever watch This Is Us? I think you didn't, did you?
No, I did not.
Oh, I highly recommend it. But anyway, there's a couple on there that would play this like worst case scenario game. They would just be like, all right, let's just do it. Worst case scenario. And then they would just be like, this guy that our daughter's dating ends up being a serial killer and he like murders us in our sleep or whatever. You know what I mean? Like they just would sort of like go to the extreme, right? Of like, let's just get that out there.
Okay.
Let's just get out there what it would be the worst case scenario. And so I think like when you said it, even the range, I think sometimes for our brains even to like say, okay, what might be the worst case scenario? What might be the best case scenario?
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you see the quote that's like, what if it all works out? And I always see that. I'm like, yeah, probably not.
Right.
But I think that it's almost like a dress rehearsal in either way. Right. So to do a dress rehearsal of, you know, even like I think about, okay, so we have a trip planned later this summer that I've talked about, like to Montreal. And I haven't even like it's booked now and I haven't even really been thinking about it.
Right.
Probably for these reasons. And so I can imagine like, okay, worst case scenario, like it all gets canceled. We lose a whole bunch of money. We're all sad. You can't, you know, and I'm not even going to play the game of like, why? But like worst case scenario, nobody gets to go. We lose all our money. Right. Best case scenario, it happens and we go and we have a fantastic time.
Right.
And so even like imagining like, okay, here's the spectrum and maybe it's somewhere in the middle, you know, but I think to have a healthy sort of, there's a spectrum of potential things that could happen and either end is possible as well as what's in the middle instead of always hanging out on one end of the other, like everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be terrible. Just to be like, there's a range of what might happen, you know? So to sort of prepare ourselves going into things is half of it. And then I think the other half is like, what happens when, like, if that whole trip does get canceled and we lose all that money, like, how might I be able to manage my disappointment in that moment?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And I think the other thing another thing that kind of came to mind as kind of thinking about this topic is the boardroom analogy.
Ooh,
that we talk about.
Not talked about that for a while.
Where, you know, making sure you give your emotions the time to speak. And I think disappointment is one of those. And like something happens, you're feeling disappointed, like don't be too quick to push past that.
Yep.
Let disappointment have its voice. Listen to it, give it space, like allow yourself to be disappointed. And you know, maybe there's grief as a piece of that, or just the frustration or resentment or like whatever the emotions around that are. Like it's important to feel that and not just rush past that.
Yep. So good. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the way I do it in the boardroom is I'm like, okay, here's the mic. Who wants it? But you're right. I think even in those moments, being intentional to be like, hey, disappointment, do you want the mic? You have something you might like to say? We're all here. We're going to listen. And then something I think to be like, anybody else, like you said, is it grief? Is it sadness? Is it whatever? Is it anger? Is it resentment? But I think also sometimes I've thought about like, is there a buddy? Like, is there a buddy that can hang out with disappointment? Or even if it's like, let's say I'm thinking about this trip and I'm thinking about like, is it fear? Is it worry? That's like, you know, that's like, maybe it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Is hope. Can I buddy those two up?
Yeah.
Right. And you guys can hang out together, but balance it. Don't let one get louder than the other. Just hang out together and we'll move forward as we're going to this trip. But I'm so glad you brought that up because I haven't thought about that before. Every time I forget about the boardroom and then I remember it again, I'm like, Side note, a second Inside Out movie is coming out this summer and it looks brilliant because the kid in the movie is now going to be a teenager.
Okay.
So like the whole like panel of her emotions becomes more complex because she's going through puberty.
Right.
Brilliant. I just can't even wait. It's going to be so brilliant. So anyway.
Good.
Yeah. I have to I manage. So one of my biggest disappointment things has been that was like a year and a half ago now. I was supposed to go to Cancun.
Right.
With my best friend. And she and I have gone to like Wisconsin or Chicago, right? Like we've done like little things before, but this was going to be like, it was like, I think it was, we were both turning 40. I don't know. There was something.
Yeah.
And we were like, yep, we're going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was actually super anxious leading up to it because in my heart, I was like, my life always messes stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to mess up this trip for her. I don't know how, I don't know why, but it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when Sean's mom got sick we got the call that was like, you need to come. And, of course our family was like, you can go to Cancun. I was like, absolutely not. I'm not going.
Right. Yeah.
And I knew that it was the right decision and all of that. But my goodness, it was sad. And so there was these moments of even like in the grief and sadness where people, I think, were probably like, well, you're probably crying because your mother-in-law is in the ER and in the hospital. And I was like, I am, but also I'm crying because I was supposed to be in Cancun.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not even about the Cancun. It's just the like, really?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the other piece that I really feel bogged down by sometimes is when I bring other people into it.
Right.
Right. Like my friend did not get to go to Cancun.
Right.
Right. She didn't go without me. And so therefore she was stuck in Minnesota in January, and I feel like I am unreliable in that way. And if it's like, I just have to keep canceling things for myself, that's one level of disappointment. But I feel disappointed that like my mom had to say, like, well, I always put things in pencil.
Yeah.
Like that I can't be a reliable friend, daughter, employee, like any of those things because my life. And that feels really disappointing.
Yeah. Like you don't want to be a disappointment to the other people,
right?
To cause them disappointment. I think something to keep in mind there, and I don't remember you said something at the beginning of that, like, I don't remember what it was, but it's not our fault, I think is important with the kind of thing you're talking about. Right. It feels like it's our lives and it's like, I am unreliable, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's the illness.
Right.
And so I think that's it's kind of, to remember that it's not that we are unreliable. It's that the situations in our lives have just made it that way. Like we want to be able to do this. And, I think to not blame ourselves in those situations or put the fault on us. And hopefully other people don't do that either.
Right.
But I just want to.
Thank you. No, I think that's an important distinction. That's sort of like when we talk about like, I'm not mad at you, I'm mad at the situation.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, it's not that I'm unreliable. It's that my life circumstances have caused me to be unreliable or whatever,
right,
It's not just that I'm like flaky and I'm just always like canceling things. But I think it's a good distinction. And it still feels like, I know there are people in my life that are like, well, I can't ask her to be a babysitter. I can't ask her to whatever. I can't, you know what I mean? Because like, who knows what's going to happen?
Right.
And that feels sad, that my life is causing that for me to not be able to be as reliable as I wish I could be,
Yeah. 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 So if we can go back a minute to like feeling disappointment and like allowing it its space. I was reading something in preparation for this and it kind of walked through like some steps around managing disappointment. And I don't think it's perfect, but one of the things was like, yes, feeling it, allowing yourself that. And then there was kind of like having a postmortem on it a little bit. Like what expectations, or what was it first? Like thinking back to what was the circumstances that made you get your hopes up or like that made you have the decision you did. And kind of so that you can, you were doing the best you could with the information you had at the time. It wasn't that you were being maybe unrealistic. It just, at the time, yes, you could have done that. And then from there, looking at kind of what your expectations were and is that a lever you need to adjust maybe going forward is like, yeah, maybe I'm expecting too much out of some things and just kind of not to like, I think you can go through those kind of things and take the, I don't know, I don't know, to take the humanity out of it a little bit. Like you're treating it like just looking at it very clinically.
Right.
And I don't want to like promote that, but I think it is helpful to kind of have a little introspection and maybe like, okay, the next time this comes up, we have this again. Like, is there a different way I can approach it? Can I hold things, it a little lighter, or can I go in, holding the worst case, holding the best case, and kind of feeling that going into it? And I think it just seemed like a really healthy way to, I guess, process the disappointment. And it's not something that I think we're going to like every time we feel disappointed, okay, pull out the sheet.
Right.
Here's the steps. Let's go through them. But I don't know, rather than just kind of let yourself get lost in it.
Yeah. I think that's, sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's because that we caregivers are people who are going to experience disappointment more often. I think that step is even more important because it's, and again, you said it's not like we have to every time do it, but I mean, just even the conversation that you and I are having right now, that I feel like, okay, the next time this happens, I'm going to go to my boardroom and say like, here's the Mike disappointment. What do you want to say? And then I think an important takeaway I'm already having today is the piece around like, it is my life circumstances that are causing this. This isn't like, because especially as an Enneagram 3, right? It's like, this isn't you, Allison. This isn't you not performing. This isn't you, And so just having that moment as opposed to just being like, right? Like those little moments. And the more we sort of practice those things, then we'll be better prepared for the next time we're disappointed, which we know will happen soon, probably. Right. And so it's, forming those grooves in our brain so that the next time it comes, we're like, oh, I'm going to take a second and be like, hey, this feels really disappointing, or what do you need? Or you know what I mean? And so it doesn't have to be this huge thing, but the more we sort of build up our skill set, knowing that it's a skill set we caregivers probably need more so than many, Yeah. I want to make sure we have time to talk about people.
Yeah. I was just going to mention that we should maybe talk about that now.
About the I think that this comes up a lot when we talk about ring theory and we think about the people. There can be a lot of disappointment, especially in the people in rings, let's say 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah.
Like we talked about last time with boundaries, like if person ring 75 says the dumb thing or doesn't show up or whatever, I'm like, well, that was annoying, but whatever. But if someone in ring 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, doesn't show up, and I expect them to because they're my whatever. Yeah. That can feel really disappointing.
Yep.
So maybe they say the wrong thing. They don't show up. They say they're going to do a thing. They just like go silent. Like, what are the ways that we can manage disappointment when it comes to other humans and the way that they are or are not treating us and our person during these hard times?
Right. That's a good question, a good thing to think about. I think it's important to think about the fact that it is something that is out of our control. It is one of those things that it's not a reflection on us or anything like that. It's they are making that choice, but that doesn't make it any easier.
Right.
But it does make it, like I mentioned at the beginning, to feel that over and over again.
Yeah.
If that happens 2, 3, 4 times from the same person, like, are you going to reach out to them again?
Right.
Maybe not. Probably not.
Or maybe you shouldn't.
Right. Maybe that's a boundary that you need to put up.
See last episode.
But if, people around you are always going to disappoint you because that's, we're all humans and we're not perfect. And so I think it's also, it's that piece of, you can't expect that everyone's going to disappoint you and thus not reach out, because I think that you're just going to isolate yourself and then you're going to not be in a good situation. So I think it's the situation where we kind of have to keep being vulnerable. And I think that's one of the fears of like asking for help, is that you're not going to get it, that you will be disappointed and you're like opening yourself up for this. And then it's just not well received, or you don't hear anything or whatever it is. And that's I think the fear of that is one of the things that makes asking for help really hard.
Yep.
Is just that I don't want to be disappointed. I don't want to create an opportunity for more disappointment.
Yep. Well, let's like kind of case study this thing, shall we?
Yeah.
So let's pretend. So I don't have a sister. I have sister-in-laws, but I don't have a sister. So I'm just going to say sister, right? So that we know that this is a hypothetical situation.
I also don't have a sister.
Okay, perfect.
So
our sisters are not showing up for us.
Right.
And so let's say that's true. Let's say that like there's a new diagnosis and a hard thing, and like our not strangers, but like our friends and acquaintances and are showing up and are bringing casseroles and are saying the right thing and are sending gift cards and, all the things. And our sisters are not. Crickets.
Yeah.
Right? From our sisters. And so from what we said before, one thing to do is to like, that's disappointing. And so to go into the boardroom and be like, let's take some time with disappointment. Like, how you feeling? Because it can feel hurtful. That can feel, there can be grief. It's important to take time to be like, I feel really disappointed that my sister is not doing anything right now. Right. Is not showing up in the way. So there's that. But then the second thing you said was to do the sort of like plan, if you will. Right. And so to say like, so what can I learn from this?
Right.
And so maybe we learn from this, like to not ask the sister for something. Maybe it's in that moment, it's to stop and say like, yes, sister, who's maybe ring 3 isn't doing anything, but you know who is? Rings 10, 11, and 12 are showing up for me big time.
Right.
And I can grieve that ring 3 isn't, but I can also stop and be like, I am getting help. And I'm a little bit sad that it's not from this person, but I'm really grateful that these other people are showing up in this way. And so moving forward, I'm just going to reach out to 10, 11, 12 because I know they're going to show up for me. And that way I don't have to like have the expectation or the disappointment of like my sister not showing up.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does. And it makes me think of, we've been talking about holding both extremes and kind of at the same time. And on the one side, just accepting that your sister is not going to come through is one option. You can also have a conversation.
Sure.
And I guess the extreme is to be very confrontational about that and just like come at like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Like, why aren't you showing up for me? And I don't think it has to be that. It shouldn't be that. That feels very uncomfortable for me.
I'm shocked.
But I think too, like that's an okay thing to also do is to have a conversation and be like, hey, this is, I don't know, it's painful for me that I'm not getting support from you. And, they may have reasons, things that they're going through internally that make it hard for them to provide that support. And not that is an excuse, but it can be an opportunity to understand better. And so if they truly are a person in like ring, 2 or 3, like they're a close person in our lives.
Yeah.
And I think there can be value in putting in some effort to understand that situation better. And maybe in the future having some better outcomes. I think another place where that dynamic could very easily play out is siblings caring for a parent. And I think like, one sibling is bearing the brunt of the responsibility and other siblings aren't stepping up in the same way. The disappointment there has to be immense. That, and there would be all kinds of feelings that would be paired along with that.
Yeah.
Of feeling angry, feeling resentful, all of that stuff. And I think like that's a rightful place to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And maybe it won't go.
Right.
Maybe it's not going to change anything.
Right.
But it's a release valve. Like you can air your grievance. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that might have some benefit. If it's a situation where, whether it's your personality type or the particular situation where that just doesn't feel possible, having a friend, having a therapist, someone that you can really talk through that kind of situation, like how it makes you feel and all of that as a alternative path for the release valve.
Yep.
I think that's good too.
Yep. Because I think you bring up a really good point that especially if it's a person in ring 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever, like those are close people to us. And that relationship may be worth sort of fighting for.
Right. Yeah.
And they may have no idea that we're feeling like this. And so to even start by saying, it feels XYZ when you're not XYZ, therefore it would feel really good if you could, this kind of thing. And then, but be prepared that maybe that's just not what's going to happen, but at least you tried. Right. Yeah.
And I think a conversation like that is a great place to use those I statements. Like, I feel disappointed that I don't get more help from you, or I don't know exactly how to word it, but to not make it accusatory.
Sure.
I think would help set the tone. Not that I have a lot of practice in those kinds of conversations.
Right. But we're all working on it, right?
Yes.
I think the other thing I think a lot about, like the Eye on a Care app.
Yeah.
Which I love and use. I just used it this week. And people are scared to do it because so the Eye on a Care app is you just set up a team and then you can put out requests.
Yeah.
For things, for support. And people are scared to do that because they're like, what if I put out a request and nobody picks it up? Or they get really excited. I coached somebody once to set up a team and she was like, I don't know if I can. I was like, you can do it. Your people want to help. Set up a team. And then people just said like thoughts and prayers and nobody reached out to help. Disappointing.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think there's that piece too, that sometimes with the asking of help from our community, that maybe we put ourselves out there in that vulnerable way, like you mentioned, and say like, I could really use some help with, which is hard for a lot of us to say.
Yeah.
And then if it's crickets and nobody jumps in to help, that can be really disappointing. And it can like shut us back into our little cave of being like, well, see that? I'm not asking for help again because nobody showed up anyway. So I don't know the answer to that, but I'm just saying that's another thing that can happen.
Yeah. And this is not intended to bright side that situation, but another way of looking at that is you did a hard thing. You put yourself out there. You asked for help. That was not easy. You were vulnerable. Like, you have done that once. You can do that again.
Yeah.
And other people failed you. You didn't fail the situation, or you're not failing your person. That's outside of your control. But you did the hard thing. And you put yourself out there. I think that's another narrative that you can hold through that situation.
Well, and I think even like you said earlier, like maybe it's so in the Eye on a Care app, you can put updates. And so maybe you want to be super vulnerable and put in the update.
Right.
It took a lot for me to put this team together and to put this request out. And it felt really hard when nobody picked anything up. And so, I'm going to continue to try this. And I know that people are busy, but if you're able, it would be really helpful for me if you could, do that. So, yeah. Supporters.
Yeah.
What can we do? What could that look like? What do we want our supporters to hear about this?
Yeah. I think one, to understand that our lives as caregivers, the situation makes disappointment likely a more frequent occurrence, that we just face or have the situations that potentially we face more of that. And to not add to that, to be reliable, to show up, to be an area of their life where they can feel supported and that they can count on you.
Yeah.
And to just have that, I don't know, to feel solid, some amount of solidity because, you're there.
Yeah. I think to add to that, I think that if I do make plans with a friend, like I'm going to probably try to do everything I can to make that happen.
Right.
And so, because I know that there's a lot of reasons when it does get canceled. And so know that if I am showing up or if I am doing it, like it's a big deal. And so can you also show up? Can you be there? Right. So because it takes like twice as much effort on my part. And so can you be that reliable person on the other side?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to add to that, if it's a situation where you have plans whatever level of plans with the caregiver, and something comes up in the caregiver's life and they have to cancel, don't in your response add fuel to their disappointment. To be understanding, to be gracious, and you have your own disappointment about that.
Yep.
But the caregiver is not the person to vent that disappointment to.
Yes. It's bigger circle.
Vent that disappointment. Your disappointment is also 100% valid.
Yep.
And, you are entitled to feel that as well, but be mindful of how you channel that.
Yep. I just have to give an example of this week. Like I said, I was so tired, and I had tickets to go see an author with my best friend, the one that I didn't get to go to Cancun with. And I was just so tired. And I thought, I don't think I can do this 7:30 p.m. in a faraway suburb event, So that afternoon I texted her and I said, look, I am feeling burnout, toasted, exhausted, and I just don't think I can do it tonight. And she wrote back and said, I completely understand. No problem. Rest well. I love you. And I just felt like zero. Like when she said, I completely understand, I was like, oh, like it wasn't even like, no problem. It's just something about her saying, I completely understand, that made me feel like, oh, she gets it. And she's probably tired and she's probably exhausted. And it's not just me. And it's, you know what I mean? Then I was like, okay. Like I felt like I could just like feel okay about that just in her response. You know what I mean? That it wasn't like, okay, well, maybe next time. You know what I mean? And so I think show us grace if we do have to cancel, if we do have to whatever. I think the other thing when we talk about the people part is to know, if a caregiver is asking for help or is putting themselves out there, that's a big deal. And so really try to be responsive to that as much as you're able. And if they approach you and say something like, this felt really hard when again, like any of these extra things like that, these hard conversations can be hard for anybody, but for us, like with such limited time and energy and capacity, hard conversations like that are even more of a big deal. Right. And so just respect that and just realize that like anything that we do was probably harder for us to get to and to do. And so give it more weight or something, if that makes sense, and really listen if we're coming to you and saying like, this feels hard or this feels disappointing.
And don't be defensive in that conversation.
Right.
Don't really listen and try to hear what they're saying.
Right. Yes. Really listen. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, may this week ahead be one with few disappointments.
Yeah. I was just going to say less disappointments.
Yes. Less than normal.
Yeah.
But I think I'm definitely going to say I'm taking away that like giving my disappointment space and not just trying to like shove it down or bulldoze over it. Or bright side it. And then also what can I learn from like the situation, like the sort of a little bit of pre-planning. And then I think also the continuum piece of like, this could go terribly. This could go beautifully. Probably something in the middle will happen. But like even sort of like doing the dress rehearsal in my mind of like what might happen. I think I think these are all healthy, good tools to have in our toolkit.
Yeah, for sure. Good.
Cool. All right. Thanks, friend.
Yeah, it's a good conversation.
Yeah. Talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.